Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. As I knit my Founder's Day socks, I was thinking about how knitters react when we encounter a new to us skill. Some knitters recognize that learning and improving is just an ongoing part of the creative process. Other knitters set mental roadblocks and unnecessarily convince themselves that they can't do a certain skill because they think it's too complicated. Reading a stitch chart is the skill I most frequently hear knitters say they can't do. And if the first stitch chart you encounter is something large and involved like this, it's understandable that you may feel intimidated and overwhelmed. In today's tutorial, I'm not going to explain the ins and outs of how to read every single knitting stitch chart. Instead, this lesson is meant to be a confidence builder. I'll tell you a different way to think about what the symbols on a knitting chart really represent. Then we'll do a quick activity and hopefully that convinces you that yes, you can read a stitch chart. Let's get started. Believe it or not, stitch charts are meant to be a simplified way to communicate patterns. Charts are a graphic representation of what the right side of our knit fabric is going to look like. And you've probably already noticed that this chart looks a lot like these stitches in my Founder's Day socks. Because of the correlation between what a chart looks like and what the finished fabric looks like, we usually think of the symbols in a chart as a representation of each stitch or series of stitches in a pattern. Unfortunately, that interpretation is what can intimidate some knitters, because when we see a chart, especially one that's maybe more complicated than this, that has a lot of different symbols, we put up a mental roadblock and worry that we can't create such a complicated looking design in our fabric. So I'd like to offer an alternative way to think about the symbols. The symbols just represent an action you need to perform with your hands. The actions you make with your hands are going to be the same, whether you see the symbol for that action in a chart or the abbreviation for that action in the written out instructions. Also, uncommon actions and symbols are going to be defined in your pattern, whether you're reading the abbreviation or the charted symbol. So for example, for my chart, a blank square means I'm going to make the action of knitting a stitch. And I think if you're watching this video, you know how to do that. If I see a square with a dot in it, it means you're going to purl a stitch. Again, that's an action that you probably already know how to do. This symbol means you're going to make a 1/1 right purl cable. And even though that may not be an action that you're familiar with, it's going to be defined in the pattern. So I hope you just had an aha moment and we can knock down one mental roadblock. Chart symbols are the actions we're going to take in our knitting. No matter how many different symbols there are on a chart, if you can perform the actions of the written or abbreviated stitches, like you would see in the written out version of the pattern, you can perform those same actions when the pattern is presented in a charted form. The physical motions will never be different, whether you're looking at a chart or whether you're reading the abbreviations in the written out instructions. So now you know that the symbols of a chart each represent an action, and you hopefully had an aha moment, and you know that if you can perform the actions in the written version of the pattern, you can perform those same actions in the charted pattern. So let's practice reading this chart together. Again, you probably already know how to make the actions for a knit and a purl. And you may not be familiar with how to make the action for a 1/1 right purl cable, but the pattern's going to tell you how to perform that action. Since I only have so many hands, instead of trying to point at the charted symbols and perform these knitting actions, instead let's perform different actions. When we see a blank square, we'll tap our hands on the table. When we see a square with a dot on it, snap your fingers. When you see this fancy symbol, bump your hand and then snap your fingers. As you're watching, practice your chart reading and perform the actions with me. And to make things easier, I'm going to cover things up so we only focus on one row of the chart at a time and don't become overwhelmed with what's going to happen next. So let's read from the right to the left across the first row of our chart. We're going to tap, 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 tap. That was easy. We read across the row and performed the actions. Now let's perform the actions in the next row. Tap, 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 bump, snap. Row 3, tap, 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 tap. Row 4, tap, tap, bump, snap, snap. I think you're getting the hang of it. Row 5, tap, 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 tap. Row 6, tap, bump, snap, snap, snap. Row 7, tap, 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 tap. And finally, row 8, bump, snap, 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 snap. And guess what? You did it. Even though we substituted different actions for the chart, you read a knitting chart. Well done. I hope you're feeling more confident about chart reading and enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to support our ongoing production of videos like this, or would like to practice your chart reading skills, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for the Founder's Day Socks pattern. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!